we are the of ancient Israel, which is kind of cool. But basically, it would be if your father was. Therefore, it's through the male line only. So let's say, Sheila, your father said, well, I'm a Cohen. Let's say your last name is maiden name was Cohen. It wouldn't matter. Garnish. Just for me, forget about it, okay? It doesn't matter at all.
What if the woman marries a man who is Levite?
Then your children would be, your male children would be that. The females, it's irrelevant. All females are Israelites, according to the traditional system. So, for instance, at Anshe Shalom down the street here, they are an egalitarian, conservative synagogue. And they do something which is totally, if you're Orthodox, you'd be laughing and saying that's ridiculous. They actually call up, because they still continue this caste ranking system by calling people up for the blessings over the Torah based upon which caste you are in. So the Kohen goes first, Levite second, and then all the other calling, and we'll talk about this later on, all the people coming up for the honor of the Torah, they're all then Israelites. However, they allow women to come because their father was okay, but they ain't Kohen. They are not. They cannot align the women according to traditional Judaism. Reform Judaism ignores this whole thing completely. Okay, anyway, the book of Numbers is a continuation from Exodus of the journey of our ancestors on the way to the promised land. The book of Deuteronomy, repetition of the Nomi of the law, is simply Moses repeating the story of everything that happened before. He was a wonderful teacher. He summarized all of his lessons and then said, hasta la vista. No, he didn't speak Spanish. Okay. He said shalom and goodbye, and they left without it. Okay. So therefore, these first 5 books of the Bible, and remember I mentioned this last time, I hope, the Bible, our Tanakh, is the autobiography of the Jewish people. It is our book. Were there other people in the world during these times? Of course there were, all over the world. Okay? Are we the oldest people in the world, civilization? Definitely not. Chinese were around, the Native Americans were around, in Africa, the Incas, the Mayans, whatever. Okay. So, but we're not concerned about them. First of all, we didn't know about them, number one. Number two is we weren't concerned about them. Okay. The book of now, notice the arrow on the top goes to the right side, Nevi'im, which means prophets. And it says Prophets, not Profits. Okay, they didn't make money. Okay, now the first Joshua was the successor to Moses. So that's about 1300 BCE. Judges. I mentioned this very briefly last time. They were not Judge Judy. Okay? They were not criminal court judges. Basically, the word shoftim actually were warriors. Because Israel, the 12 tribes, remember? 12 sons of Israel, Jacob, were not united yet under one people. They weren't united until the first king of Israel, whose name was Saul. And so therefore, there were 12 tribes. So sometimes the tribes fought with each other, okay? That's my here. Okay. Other times, they fought with other Philistines or other enemies surrounding Israel, like today, of course, unfortunately. And so each judge comes from a different tribe, and they're described in the book of Judges. So there are some interesting stories. Let's see, Joshua, the Battle of Jericho, of course, is Joshua. Deborah, who's a woman prophet, stood up and fought for certain people. The book of Samuel, Samuel was a prophet of ancient Israel. Samuel was, let us say, around the year 1100 BCE. Samuel, as all prophets, meaning a spokesman for God, he was a holy man. But there were holy men, but the prophets were spokesmen for God. They had nothing to do with prayers or rituals like the Kohen, like I said before. By the way, if I say something that you're confused about, just raise your hand, okay? We'll talk, just ask. Okay. Samuel was the one who appointed King Saul to be the first king of Israel. Let's say around 1100 or so, 1050 BCE, the first king of Israel. And the reason for that, according to the book of Samuel, and by the way, there were two books of Samuel, there's Samuel 1 and Samuel 2, and Kings, Samuel 1, Kings 1, and Kings 2. So that Samuel, a prophet, must be the one to appoint someone to be a king, and in a ceremony very similar to what we saw last year of the coronation of King Charles of England. Okay, you had to have the Archbishop of Canterbury there to make it holy. You had a prophet of Israel there to present God's blessings. You also had to have holy oil. And by the way, the oil that was used at the ceremony of King Charles was brought from Jerusalem. Yeah. And because that has been the ritual of anointing the kings and queens of England going back to winter. Okay. So therefore, the next king of Israel was David, and he was appointed by this prophet Nathan. And then the third king of Israel was Solomon. So it was somewhere, let's say, around the year 950 BCE. The rest of the book of Kings continues a description of the history of the divided people of Israel. Remember, after Solomon, he had two sons, Rehoboam and Jeroboam, and one went north, one went south. There were two separate kingdoms. The kingdom in the north was called Israel, and the capital is Samaria. You could go to Israel today and actually visit. They actually have ruins of the ancient palace in Samaria of the kings there. And then the south was Jerusalem. As time went on, going into the 700s BCE, the northern kingdom was destroyed and occupied and overcome by the Babylonians coming down. And in the year 500 something, 572 or something like that, the southern kingdom of Judah was wiped away. But all of this is described in Samuel 1 and 2 and Kings 1 and 2. Actually, Kings 2 takes us all the way down almost to the 300s BCE, when the Persian Empire was conquered by the Greek Empire. And of course, there was this really cool guy, and his name was Alexander the Great. What if his wife called him that? Hey, Alex would be great. I don't think she could. Yeah, no. Any wife who calls the husband the Great is really not a good start. Okay, Alexander the So-So. Yeah, well, I wouldn't want to fool around with Alexander. Anyway, so notice what is totally amazing is that from Genesis to Kings, we have gone through at least 3,000 years of history. So when you look at that book up there, it looks small up there. The print is pretty small, and the blue book above Hannah's head. I don't know how many of you have a Tanakh or Bible at home. It's about most Bibles around 900,000 pages. There's a lot of stuff going on there. Okay. Now it might be that they'll mention the king of Israel, and some of the kings of Israel ruled only for 3 years or something. They'll mention King so and so ruled for 33 years, and then he sinned against God. And because when the kings lost their power, it was because they sinned against God, and God said, "Go, God off with you, not off with your head, but off with you. Sometimes off your head." Okay. So based these 700s, the 800s, and 700s and 600s BCE. There was most probably, and I'm throwing a lot of stuff out to you. I know I give a lot of information. Okay. Isaiah, there was no one guy named Isaiah. There were probably at least spokesmen for God. whether it was Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, I mentioned this last time. All three of them basically either preached to the people of Israel before the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem or after, when the Jews were in captivity in Babylonia in the 700s, the northern kingdom, and later the Jerusalem, the lower, is that they were, as I said, the spokesman for God, letting people know what God wants of them. And they were the ones, remember from last week, who basically universalized Jewish thought in a totally amazing way. And how? They said that God is in control of everything and everyone. There's only one God in all of existence. These other groups, the Greeks, the Syrians, all these people, they have lots of gods, but we are the only one with one God. Their gods are all false gods. Our God is in charge. And if anyone were to say, well, how do we know that? Imagine saying, well, guess what? What God, except our God, would destroy his own house, his own home, the temple in Jerusalem, built by King Solomon, one of the most incredibly beautiful architectural structures in all the world in ancient times, if he wasn't doing it himself, meaning God, and did that to punish you because you started worshiping statues and we're turning away from God. And God said, I have no choice but to destroy my temple and have the Babylonians come in here and take you away as refugees to another country. Okay. Now, I'm not going to go there. Could you apply the same theology that is happening in Israel today? Well, I guess theoretically you could. That'd be pretty harsh. Although the Satmar Rebbe, going back to World War II and the Holocaust, to me, had the nerve to say the reason for the 6 million Jews being dying like they did and murdered like they were was because the Jewish community tried to establish a state of Israel as a political state and not as a spiritual entity by the Messiah. And therefore the Jews were punished. Well, that's a pretty horrible thing to say. I don't want to say, I'd rather say nothing. But the Satmar Rebbe was taking the same theology, the way of thinking about God as described by the prophets of ancient Israel. What agrees with them or not, that's irrelevant at this time. But anyway, you have the Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel were those who gave hope to the people of Israel, because if one could say the reason why this is happening to you, you're in exile, is because you sinned against God, then guess what? If you turn back to God, then guess what? God will restore you to your place and bless you. So the prophets were busy with what's called the phrase, the if-then phrase. They weren't predicting. They were not Nostradamus. They didn't predict the future. That wasn't that kind of prophet. They were spokesmen for God, and it was an if-then. If you pray to God, then you'll be blessed. If you worship idols and statues, then you're going to be cursed. Okay. If you care for the poor, but they also spoke about ethics and caring for the society. If you take care of the poor and the widow and the orphan in your community, then God will bless you. But if you turn them away and do not care for them, then you are going to not receive blessings. Judaism was always based upon the fact of an if-then kind of theology and belief in God, God's interaction with us. Now notice, you have the 12. Underneath Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, you have the 12 more prophets. Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Whoever memorizes all 12 of them in order for next week, I can say them in the opposite order, will get a prize. Okay. No.
I'd love a prize.
Okay. You have me. Okay, it's your rabbi. Okay.
You all have
Yeah. Yes. Now, why are they the minor prophets? Not because they were any more minor than anybody, but because we have less of their teachings and their sayings. These guys, all men, I'm sorry, ladies, all these guys didn't write down the things they said. They had scribes, people writing these things down. boy, did you hear what Isaiah said today? Oh, no, I didn't. Well, this is it. Because obviously they didn't have MP3 and they didn't have recordings and blah, blah today and streaming, whatever. And so they wrote these things down. And therefore, we have more of the writings of the sayings of what Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel said versus the minor ones. So that's why they are called minor. Not because, I mean, some of the things that they said are, if you read through them, are extraordinarily beautiful, insightful, in terms of living the right kind of ethical and moral life. And parenthetically, Reformed Judaism based itself upon the prophetic, the words of the prophets. Because when Reformed Judaism, as it developed later on, I'll talk about that, began to focus less on ritual and spirituality and more on changing the world and making it a better world to live in, a social action type of thing, they went to the prophets of ancient Israel. And that's the 12. So we're now moving again. Historically, we're down to like the 4th century BCE. Now, the former prophets, Psalms, Proverbs. The book of Psalms is made up of 150 poems to God. Probably the most well-known one is, of course, the 23rd Psalm, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. But there are 150 of them. Most people will say the poems, 150 of them were written by King David. It's highly unlikely that they all were written by King David. Maybe some of them, really, no one knows. But they are very beautiful, beautiful poems to God. The book of Proverbs, these are, yes,
using the form of prophet implies that they were excommunicated from the prophet.
not just later, no, means earlier. Earlier, right?
Yeah,
Like, it's not like, right, like, it's not like how you're the former husband of Donna. Meaning you are the not first one. Yeah. No, it just means they're the earlier ones, former, earlier,
Yeah,
right? Right. And notice not We read through the entire 5 books of Moses every single Shabbat. We also read a selection from either Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, or the 12 minor prophets every single Shabbat of the year in a reading that's called the Haftarah. It is not Haftorah, a Torah or something. It's Haftarah, which means an additional reading. Every single Shabbat, every single holiday of the year, there's a selected reading from the Torah in order, and selected readings from all of these prophets. Okay, so therefore, during the course of the Jewish calendar year, if you came to shul every single Shabbat and every single holiday, or you read on your own, okay, all of these things, which you could, they're laid out for anybody who wants to know what to read on a different day, is if you would get through, look at that, about 3/4 of the Bible every single year of your life, which means you automatically become an educated Jew. However, the book of Psalms, one could read the book of Psalms. Hi, Larry. Okay, one could read the book of Psalms in various ways. The book of Psalms can be divided into 7 smaller readings. The 150 divided into 70, about 20 a day approximately, right? Okay. Or there's ways of taking the book of Psalms and reading the entire book of Psalms in a month. There are different divisions of the book of Psalms. I was amazed when Judy and I, when I go into rabbinical school and Judy was teaching in Brooklyn during our first 7 years of marriage, I would get on the subway and go from Brooklyn to Manhattan, where Hebrew Union College was. And quite often I'd be sitting often next to an Orthodox woman, and I would look over and she's reading something in Hebrew, and it wasn't a prayer book, she'd be reading the Psalms. Yeah, well, in Yiddish possibly, or in English, but I mean Hebrew. But the fact is she was reading the Psalms. There are designated readings for every single day of the week, so that either in 1 week or in 1 month you get through all 150. Okay, there's that book. The book of Proverbs, you're not going to there's no designated readings for. The book of Job, none. However, Song of Songs, Ruth, Lamentations, all of those you read for those holidays. If you got those every single year, you go to all those holidays. Daniel, Azariah, Nehemiah, Chronicles, forget about it. So basically, only Proverbs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 books out of 39, you might not read it all during the year. But 33 books, 33 books, every single year of your life, you would read through all of them. However, Hannah, do me a favor, turn around, and on the second shelf down, that's here all the way to your left, all the way. There's that big book in blue next to the story of Judaism. Or the Chumash, that one. Yeah, Kahava, please. Okay. This is called a Chumash. Oh, and do me a favor since you're there. Give me the Tanakh up there, the shelf up there. Okay. This is called a Bible. This is called a Chumash. All this is all I just told you. What's the only page? Oh God, look at this. Now we'll have 3 glasses. I'm always on the wrong one. I'm always wearing the wrong glass. And my optometrist did away with my prisms, which was worked out very good. But now I have 3. You don't want to give me. You don't care. Okay. Maybe you do care. Okay. 1,624 pages. Okay. You have to memorize for next week. 39 books.
That's all 39 books?
Yes. Now, therefore, if anyone were to say, what? Definitely. Yeah, oh, yeah, of course.
And then it's 3,000. And
Rabbi,
£5.
between Helene and I, we have gone through what we have in house, and we may have enough in house people want to borrow and not buy yet.
Okay, very good. However, I will say the following to you. A Jew never just reads the Bible. Okay? And I don't mean when I say versus any other religion, I'm not saying negative. A Christian will pick up a Bible and only read the Bible and believe that it is, of course, the Word of God, which traditional Jews do also. And they will just read this and find inspiration from it. A lot of this, however, who knows what in the world is being said here. Why? Because you need, sorry, Larry. Okay, you need this book or like this book that has commentaries on the bottom. A Jewish person reads the Torah with the comments of the rabbis and scholars through time. It can be found in many different kinds of books, but this book is called a Chumash, which means a fifth, and it's not of scholars. Okay, it takes the 5 books of Moses and divides them into all of the Torah readings and Haftarah readings for the entire year, but with the commentary in the bottom. Okay, and some of you are in the Torah class, Torah study group. We have an example. Anyway, if not, come along. Okay, but anyway, this is the way a Jew understands the Bible. So notice you're sitting after if you read this every single day of every year of your life, every day of a year of your life, after a while it gets a little boring. You need other things, and of course, you need the commentaries, which take you and delve you and bring you back in time. And these commentaries go back at least 2,000, some of them 2,000 years ago, which we'll look at in a few moments. Okay, so any questions? Yeah. Many of them. Okay, who are obviously we'll talk about them as we go along. But they really, well, let's go. Okay, all right, let's go to the next page. Okay, so anyway, everyone understands this, right? How the Bible works? Okay, how amazing it is. So number one is, if someone were to say to you, okay, you go to the rabbi's class, what's the Bible? I want to do what's the Bible? Your answer is, the Bible is the autobiography of the Jewish people, but it is an anthology of 39 books. Each one of these books, now you know, is very different than the other. So it's not all one book. It's not as if you have 39 chapters in a novel and one chapter goes to the other chapter. It's disconnected. The order, by the way, was established by the rabbis in the Talmudic period 2,000 years ago. When they had to canonize the Bible. What does that mean? They selected which books would be in the Hebrew Bible, and there were a lot of other books written at that time, 2,000 years ago, a lot of books. But for various reasons, they would not include certain books in the Bible because certain books violated Jewish thinking about God, about life, whatever. There were many other books that were kept. We still have them, fortunately, and they become what's called the Apocrypha. I don't have a chalkboard or anything, so I can't write anything down. I'm gonna write it here. So go there. That'd be like really cool, wouldn't it? Wilson, I did that like a movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, hologram thing. Like I saw that in what is that called? Yeah. With whatever it is. Okay, anyway. I could write in the air and you can see what I'm doing. Matrix. Oh, that would really freak you out, wouldn't it? If I just did that now. Yeah. Wow. I got more people here. Okay, anyway. Matrix Rabbi. Okay, anyway. The fact is, Apocrypha, 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 also in the Hebrew, Sefarim Kitzoniyim, which means the outside books. There are many of them, some of them large, some of them small, that were not included in the canon of the Hebrew Bible. But think about it. If the Bible was canonized, in other words, these are the books, and that's it, and no more can be added to it, occurred 2,000 years ago. Why? Because the Christianity was developing, and Christianity was coming along and saying, guess what? There's an Old Testament, and we have a New Testament with more books which offer the revelation of God. In Judaism, God is revealed primarily through Scripture, the revealed word. In the beginning, God spoke. Other religions are more mystically oriented, and Judaism does have its mysticism, okay? But there are other religions in which the revelation of God's word comes through that. I sit on the mountaintop with my legs crossed, and I'm going, Om, and all of a sudden I see God, and I feel God, I come down from the mountain, and you all believe me, okay, and follow me, okay? So the fact is that Judaism and Christianity, but because Christianity was developing 2,000 years ago, that's okay. Judaism was Christianity was developing. It was essential that
You got it on there?
Yes.
Fiddling around with that long enough.
Nice.
The mountain
Yeah,
top.
you did.
So anyway, so
I gotta leave it now.
okay. Just for that one off.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, so there's a red box on the top.
Yes,
Or especially
it
phone.
was there. There it is.
Say goodnight, John boy.
Too gentle.
Yeah, that works, but it's not working.
Turn your phone off.
Great idea.
Okay, but so anyway. Okay,
So these,
Oh.
these explanations on the bottom were written originally or
Later.
after the fact,
much later.
much later.
Much later. So 2,000 years ago, when these 39 books were canonized and said this is it, for matter of fact, the rabbis in the Talmud very specifically said the last book of the prophetic section is Malachi. The word of God never spoke to anyone after Malachi. He was the last prophet. Why? Because you had Christianity saying, oh no, the voice of God still speaks. So the rabbis had to say, nope, that's it, no more. Don't believe any of that. And so the Bible was canonized at this 39 books. But again, there were many, many other books written, as you'll see in a few moments. So, if you go back into the Bible, you have the Torah, you have the stories of our ancestors. And now Jews are not only living where on the Holy Land, but they are in North Africa, they're in Egypt, they are in the Mediterranean area. Probably in Greece, certainly, maybe Italy. It's very possible, even as far as England with the Roman Empire later on. And certainly there are indications that Jews already had gone to the Far East. So Jews were everywhere, sharing a basic common sense of where they have come from. And so the question is, what do they do with it? How do they keep it updated? How do they share this vision of the one God and what God wants of us, because that's what's really important. So let's go to page 2 or 3
Tell me
actually.
what canonized means.
Means closed. The canonization of the Bible means closed,
Have they sealed it like?
sealed it. Yeah,
Right.
they said no more books. And also the same thing. Obviously, Christianity canonized the New
They
Testament.
didn't take a gun and shoot it, right?
Yeah, they said this is the end. Yeah, this is the end. You can't add anything more. Because otherwise, number one, is it'll be endless. But number two is, by doing that, you say, well, there might be another religion that says, oh no, well, the people in authority say, well, too bad, you're wrong. Is that right? Is it wrong? It is the way it is. Now, while the Jews are now Jews throughout different parts of the world, they had what's called some kind of a scroll, some kind of a sense of law, of Torah, of the stories of our people. So that there were now leaders of the community, we'll call them Soferim in Hebrew, Soferim, which means scholars, or let us call them sages. And what they would do is they would sit around and they would discuss the law. So for instance, when does the day begin? When do you say your prayers? What are you supposed to say, etc.? How do you behave as a Jew? What do you wear? What do you look like? Okay. So they began to develop, but they began to develop in two basic strains. One was law, and one was, I'll call it, ideas. Because it's not simply enough to say, God wants you to do this. It's necessary also to say, why does God want you to do this, to help you to keep on doing that? So page 2, notice it's called Midrash Rabbah. What these, going back to Hannah's question now, and also Ida's, is these Soferim began to go back to the texts that were sacred, okay? They believed that the Torah was given by God to the people of Israel through Moses at Mount Sinai, and thereby they needed to take the text, which doesn't go into a whole lot of detail. Take, for instance, the very beginning of the Torah. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Well, what did God create it from? Was there nothing? Was there some primordial substance of clay or something or other that God made it? Okay, so let's take, for instance, this. There's a Midrash Rabbah. Midrash means a rabbinic or a scholarly discussion of ideas based upon the text. If Midrash must be based upon verses in the Torah. Because again, Ida, what they're doing is they're updating it. They're taking the words of the Torah, which are very, very, lacking in any specificity. Got to be at the right place.
Not
Okay,
specific.
got to fix my teeth here. Okay. So take, for instance, the very beginning of Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So, in the beginning, God created. By the way, this was written a little bit later on in history. This is the Talmudic period, which begins, let us say, using the Christian calendar around the year 1, okay, of the Common Era, and maybe before as well. In the beginning, God created. Notice Rabbi Tanhuma is quoting from the Torah. Began. For you are great and perform wonders. Notice he's now also quoting from a later book of the Bible, the book of Psalms, right? Now you know that. And he's using one verse from the Bible to help him to understand the other. Rabbi Tanhuma said, a wineskin, if it has a hole as small as the point of a needle, all the air will escape from it. Yet a human is made with numerous cavities and orifices, but his air does not escape from him, except sometimes. Who can do so? It is you alone, our God. So you might say, what? What is this guy talking about? He understands in the beginning God created, and from Psalms you create great and perform wonders. Guess what? This human body is a miracle. This human body, are we created in the image of God? Well, they're going to discuss that. What does that mean? Does God look like me? No. Okay. Or God does look like you, might look like Larry. I don't know. But anyway, he's good looking. But on the other hand, is that the fact is a miracle the way the human body works. Because normally, if the thing has holes, air is going to come out of it all the time. Whereas fortunately, air doesn't come out of our holes all the time. Except, of course, when the rabbi doesn't stop talking. Okay.
Thank you, God.
But he goes on. When were the angels created? Rabbi Yochanan said, the angels, Malachim, were created on the second day. That is what is written. He covers his upper chambers with water, Psalm 104, and it is written, he makes the winds his messengers, Psalm 104. So what they do is, immediately what the Midrash does is, and I'm not going to read every single one of these pages, there's a lot on here, you have to read it, it's for you to take and read on your own, is that I try to select certain religious literature from each period of time to give you a sense. What's talked about here is what? Is ideas. Talking about angels, talking about God, talking about the human body, talking about the miracle. But notice, everything, going back to Hannah's question, everything has to be based upon what? The Bible, the Torah. They're not just making up ideas on the top of their head. Everything has to have its foundation in Holy Scripture. Okay, next page. The Mishnah. The Mishnah is Talmudic Israel. It was the compilation of the discussions of the laws of the rabbis, going from 190 to 230 B of the Common Era. Now, remember, I said a few moments ago that even before the Common Era, Jews were living all over the place, and they had to have laws and they had to have customs, right? How to live a Jewish life. Many of those were written down in other books. Many of those books were lost. We don't have them, but we do have these books have been kept. The Mishnah. Now, the Mishnah is also a huge book. I mean, I don't have a copy of the Mishnah here in English. I'm sure Helene does in the library. It's about 900 pages in English. Okay. And in small print again. Let's take, for instance, the first Mishnah. Now, the Mishnah is a book not of ideas alone, but of laws. how to live a Jewish life and what that means going back to the 1st century of the Common Era. So in other words, approximately 2,000 years ago. But to me, what is exciting when you read these things, like the page you just read about the Midrash, you are literally going back in time and hearing the words of these rabbis. And as you begin to study the Midrash, and by the way, all these things have commentaries to them by later rabbis to help explain these things, you're going into a room of rabbis from the past. And people love studying them because you're going back in time and making it a part of today.
Is it still added to?
Yeah,
by
oh yeah,
current rabbis?
yeah.
You can write a midrash, not a scholarly one, but any of us.
Any of
can.
us can, right? And we do. That's one of the things about our Saturday Torah class. We keep on coming up with different ideas. Okay, so the first of the there are 6 sections to the Mishnah. The first is called Ra'im, which means seeds. It has very little to do literally with seeds, like seed in the ground. And the first opening part of that is called brachot, or blessings. Notice the question here. From when, that is, from what time does one recite Shema in the evening? Okay, that's the famous opening of the Mishnah. Now, one might say, who cares what time you say the Mishnah in the evenings? Well, first of all, that becomes important because when does the Jewish day begin? At nighttime. And when? At sundown. Okay. So you have to, according to the V'ahavta prayer, which we'll be looking at, and what? You shall what? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and you shall say what? When you get up and when you go to sleep. Well, how do you know when to say when you're going to sleep, when is going to sleep? When is sleepy time? Okay, and so therefore you have to know when night begins. But remember, 2,000 years ago, they didn't have watches. They didn't have clocks on the wall. They go by nature. And so you have to define by nature or by life itself when you say the Shema, because we're required to say the Shema 2 times a day. That's a requirement by God. And in that system, going back to the prophets, if you don't, you're committing a sin. Okay? Now, it might be a minor sin, but it's still a sin. And so therefore, you got to figure these things out. So, from the time when the priests enter to partake of their terumah, this one rabbi in this discussion said, well, the time when the priests, the Kohanim, entered into the Holy of Holies to take the terumah, which was the nighttime food that would then be cooked on the altar and then guess what? Eaten, and therefore it's what? Dinner time. So when the priests would eat dinner, that's when you know you can start saying the Shema. Until when does this time, the time of the recitation of the Shema, extend? How far into the evening can you say the Shema? Do you have to say it immediately when the sun goes down with 3 stars appear? Or do you have more time? Until the end of the first watch, one rabbi said. The term used in the Torah to indicate the time for the recitation of the evening Shema, when you lie down, which refers to the time in which individuals go to sleep. Therefore, the time for the recitation of the Shema is the first portion of the night when individuals typically prepare for sleep. If you think about it, and this is the whole concept of, if you are familiar with watches, and not this kind of a watch, but for instance, in the Navy and the Army, and you're on a boat, and you have certain watches of the night, they change. I think probably every 4 hours, we would say something like that. That would be when someone would go out on the ship or go by the guard post and would stand guard for the first watch, 4 hours, let's say. And then he would go or she would go in, and the next person would come about. You have to have some divisions of time. And so, this is the statement of Rabbi Eliezer. But the rabbis said, because they were sitting around talking about Jewish law, remember, 2,000 years ago, there wasn't what we have today that we accept as a Jewish way of life. They were creating the Jewish life that we now take for granted today. And so it is that they were saying, when do these things do? So Rabbi Eliezer, the rabbi, said, the time of the recitation of the Shema is until midnight. Let's say, for instance, you're busy, you have dinner, whatever, you're busy on your farm or wherever it is 2,000 years ago, and you forget to say the Shema, and you're just busy. how long of the night can you say the Shema? Because you have to say it twice a day, at night and in the morning. Well, this rabbi said up until midnight. Rabbi Gamliel said one may recite the Shema until the dawn. You have all night long to say the Shema. Okay? And they go through this whole discussion, the rest of the page. Imagine all of this, just to discuss when you say the Shema at night and when you say the Shema in the evening. But what is important about why is because time does what? It gives the foundation for our daily lives. If you think about everything, we base upon time, right? Okay.
Except they had no way of measuring for midnight.
Right. They have to go by a sense of halfway through, approximately. Yeah. And obviously that changes with the seasons. They didn't have daylight savings time either, thank God. Okay.
So this guy comes home to his wife, and the wife says, "What'd you do all day?" "Oh, we discussed what time we should do this." "This is what you do all day?"
Yeah. Well,
A fiddler on the road, I
Right.
could sit
Mhm.
and read all day.
Study.
yeah, exactly. Now, let's turn to the next page. The Talmud is a textual record of generations of rabbinic debate about law, philosophy, and biblical interpretation, compiled between the 3rd and 8th centuries of the Common Era, and structured as a commentary to the Mishnah. The Mishnah was basically put together in the year 200 of the Common Era in Israel. But now Jews are continuing to live in Israel and also other places. Much of the Jewish population moved to Babylonia, which is in Iraq today. And so therefore, you had to what? You had different laws governing Jews in different parts of the world where they lived, and also time itself. Imagine 300 years passing. The United States is not 300 years old, right? 300 years is a very long time. Things change. And so the Talmud is the rabbinic discussion about the Mishnah. So let's go down where you see that the large print word Gemara. The Gemara is the word for teaching. It is based upon a Mishnah. So in the Talmud, you will always have a we have a whole set of the Talmud here.
That large print.
Okay, so this is a copy of that whole set of down there, those red books, that's the whole Talmud. The whole set, of course, all the way. Okay, the Cantor has for addition to. So anyway, this is a copy of the Talmud. The middle column begins with a Mishnah, a quotation from the Babylonian Talmud was written in the year 500 of the Common Era. If the Mishnah was written in the year 200, that's 300 years before, in a different place, a different time. So the rabbis sitting around would read the Mishnah and they would say, oh, in the year 197, they did this. But here in Babylonia, 300 years later, that makes no sense. So then they would go off and discuss it. The middle section column is the Talmud, and all around here, Ida, are the commentaries to explain this. And it goes on, and on, and on. Okay. So to give an example of this, the Torah, by the way, the Mishnah and the Talmud and all of these discussions, again, must be based upon the 5 books of Moses. It's sort of like in a court of law, and a judge cannot say, oh, I feel this way, and I'm gonna do this. Okay, you have to, a judge, otherwise there'll be an appeal, has to base upon precedent, upon previous laws. And basically in our country, well, that's changing a lot these days, to say the least. One person said the other day, I never even swore to the Constitution. Anyway, the fact is, that what? It's based upon the Constitution, supposedly in our country. Well, Jewish law is based upon the Torah, all of it. So therefore, let's take, for instance, in the Torah, there is a thing called the Jubilee year. The Jubilee year was by every 50 years, I talked about this one sermon, every 50 years, is that everyone who has committed, who serves somebody, in order to pay off the debt, or all persons who have loans outstanding, they are freed from their debt the 50th Jubilee year. Okay, every 50th year.
Golden Jubilee.
Now, that might work in a very small agricultural society. But once you move into a very complicated industrial type society, a more complicated mercantile society, that doesn't work anymore because people will take advantage of a system. So people will take out a loan in the 49th year and then have to, too bad, the Jubilee year, forget about it, too bad. Okay. So there was a rabbi whose name was, in the Talmudic period, hundreds of years, thousands of years later, called Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Akiva developed what was called the Probes Bull. And the Probes Bull is, guess what? He's developed a thing called a contract. And he said, guess what? You have to write a contract. And the contract overrides the Jubilee year. So I guess you could say he was the first lawyer. Okay. And the legal profession came into power, the business. Okay. So
That's why they burned them at the stake.
well, yeah, no, yeah, right. So anyway, the Talmud, therefore, is the commentary to updating to the Mishnah. So for instance, here, Gemara, the Mishnah opens with the laws concerning the appropriate time to recite the Shema with the question, from when does one recite the Shema in the evening? That's what I just mentioned to you. With regard to this question, the Gemara asks, the Gemara is the Talmud. On the basis of what prior knowledge does the Tana, the word Tana means rabbi or teacher, of our Mishnah ask from when? What does he base his question upon? What is the time he's supposed to say it from? It would seem from his question that the obligation to recite the Shema in the evening was already established, and that the Tana seeks only to clarify the details that relate to it. But our Mishnah is the very first Mishnah of the Talmud. In other words, is he asking the question when because he already knows the answer and just wants to talk about it? Or is there no answer yet, and they're creating the answer as to when in the evening can you start to say the Shema? You can see how complicated this gets. Because it's not only dealing with when you say your prayers, it has to do with what? When you light Shabbat candles, when you, what do you do for Passover? What do you do for Shabbat? It has to do with everything. It gets into laws of criminal laws and gets into civil laws. It gets into marital relations. Okay, there is a very large part of Jewish law that deals with marital relations. One very important part of traditional Jewish law has to do with what's called taharat mishpacha, or family purity, in that a woman can, in an Orthodox home, they have two beds, because 7 days of the month, 14 days of the month, no, 14 days of the month, no, 7 days of the month, a husband and wife cannot sleep together, because the woman has her period, and therefore she is considered to be unclean. Now, we're not, this is laws 2,000 years ago, but still followed in Orthodox communities to this very day. But it's taken very, very seriously in a traditional Jewish community. When Judy and I were first married, we had a we still it's up right now, a very, very dear friend who was very Orthodox. And I knew a number of Orthodox people from my rabbinical training and all. And we had a kosher home at that time, and we invited them for dinner. And they said to me, do you have two beds? And I said, no. And they said, well, they won't eat in our home then. Because if we don't follow everything, then we're not following anything at all. Okay. So anyway, the Talmud, you're going to find out as we look into the next customs and beliefs, a very important part of Jewish tradition. Next, go to the next page. So now go back in time. You're somewhere around the by the way, there were two Talmuds. There was the Jerusalem Talmud in the year 400, the Babylonian Talmud in the year 500. That Talmud down there in those big red books and those volumes is the Babylonian Talmud. Since it is later in time, it is the one that is the basis of Jewish traditional life to this very day. Some people will still quote from the Jerusalem Talmud, but basically they follow the Babylonian Talmud for the most part. Okay. So now in the 6th century of the Common Era in Babylonia. But remember, I mentioned that the Jews left Babylonia and they went west to Spain, to Portugal. Eventually, after that, they went to Northern Europe and Amsterdam. They're intermingling with all these different cultures, all these different societies. And what begins to happen is these ancient laws, the Torah, the Mishnah, the Talmud's discussion of the Mishnah, and where they had these discussions, all of them need to be what? Updated to be made relevant to the time and place. It's always what? Two things, time and place. So let's look at the next one.
All they needed was continuum, and they would have been right up there with the space.
Yeah, right. That's true. Yes. Time space continuum. Yeah. Where's Einstein? Okay. The Mishnah Torah, the repetition of the Torah, also referred to Yad HaChazakah, the strong hand, those are Hebrew words, of course, is a monumental legal code written by Rabbi Moses Maimonides, who lived 1138 to 1204, and is one of the most organized, comprehensive, influential works of Jewish law. Now, Maimonides therefore lived in, by the way, Spain in the 12th century of the Common Era. Maimonides was, I don't know how he did it. He was not only a rabbi with a congregation, but he actually was a judge. He was a teacher, and he wrote numerous books. And remember, this is before computers, and he also was a practicing physician. Yeah, and for matter of fact, some of his medical books are still studied in medical school to this day. Actually, someone quoted to me something the other day, some doctor about from Maimonides, one of his books. It was amazing. He was also a philosopher. And guess what? He not only wrote in Hebrew, but his main language was Arabic, because Jews were living, this was before the Inquisition, and he was living in Spain, and Spain was on the influence at that time of the Muslims, right? The Moors and all. Then later, of course, the Christianity came in with the Inquisition, and that was the end of that. However, why did he have to write a legal code? Because guess what? Jews weren't reading the Talmud anymore, where the laws were developed and you could actually understand how the laws developed. They didn't care anymore. They just want to know, what do I do? What do I do on Passover? What do I do on Shabbat? What do I do with my wife when this happens or that happens? Or how do I get a divorce? How do I get married? They wanted to know what the law says. So Maimonides in the Mishnah Torah wrote a legal code of law. But what Maimonides did, which was very interesting, was he wrote about all the laws in the Torah, all 613 mitzvot. He actually has a book called Sefer Mitzvot, in which he finds the rational reason for all 613 commandments. Because Maimonides was a rationalist. He believed his definition of God was the eternal mind of God that connects with our mind, enabling us to find a rational and sensible way to live. But he's a fully Orthodox Jew, to say the least, but he appealed particularly to Jews who were very interested at that time in Greek philosophy of Aristotle. And he appealed to them to say, you know something, you can be a Jew and be rational. You don't all have to be these mystics and spiritualists and whatever. You can be a rationalist and still be Jewish. One of his greatest books was called Moreh Nevuchim, the Guide for the Perplexed. And it was written for Jews who were perplexed. I don't believe this stuff anymore. All these Bubamaises and these stories and all this stuff about God and miracles and whatnot. And so Maimonides then explained it all to the best he could philosophically, using the mind. But his Mishnah Torah was extraordinary because he actually went back and described all the laws, even those of the temple in Jerusalem, that by the 13th century had been destroyed for 1,000 years. But he did believe that someday the Messiah would come and restore the temple, so get ready. But he dealt with all of the laws.
So can you just repeat that about the 613? He wrote,
A book, a commentary, he described what to do and how to do for all 613 commandments. And by the way, all 613 commandments can find a verse in the Torah that substantiates that commandment. And there are books which actually take you through the whole thing. There are 613 mitzvot or commandments in Judaism, not just 10. Out of the 613, 365 of them are written in the negative. Those are the thou shalt nots. 248 of them are the positive, such as you will honor your father and mother. You will observe the Sabbath day. You shall not murder is 365. There are many explanations where they get those numbers from. 365, the days of the year. In ancient 2,000 years ago, they believed that there were 248 parts of the body. Okay, yeah. Okay, so notice here on this page from Mishnah Torah. Again, just like these other books, there are many, many, many volumes. I have the whole set of the Mishnah Torah up in my library back in New York. I mean, it's like 7 volumes. I mean, how in the world he did all this writing? He wrote a commentary to the entire Torah, to the entire Bible. He wrote a commentary to the entire Mishnah. He wrote an entire commentary to the entire Talmud. He wrote responsive literature when people asked him questions. So, for instance, in the Talmud, it says very specifically, under 3 conditions, if someone says to you, do such and such a thing, or I will kill you, you should give up your life instead of doing these things. It says very specifically in the Talmud. One of them is, if someone comes to you and says, kill that person or I'm going to kill you, you should give up your life rather than take that person's life, because how do you know that person's any better than you? Second, if someone comes to a man and says to him, you see that woman over there, rape her or I'm going to kill you, you should take death rather than doing that. However, the third one was, if someone comes to you and says, become a Christian or become a Muslim or become a Buddhist or I'm going to kill you, that one also was, then you should die and become a martyr. And there were those in Jewish life who did. However, Maimonides said for the third one, after all, he was approaching the development of Catholicism and the Inquisition was developing the next century. Don't do that. Convert to the other religion, get to another country, get out of the situation, and go back to being a Jew. And that's where you get the Moranos and secret Jews and stuff like that. Okay. So Maimonides wrote, people write him questions, and he'd answer them. He did that, plus the Moreh Nevuchim, a book of philosophy, and a medical textbook. I don't know how this guy slept.
Was he also not summoned to Egypt to treat a king or something?
Yeah, he went.
That must have taken 3 years of his life to do that.
We didn't take a plane from Madrid to Egypt, to Cairo. You gotta
Because
take
he
a boat
was the
across.
lead physician
Yeah,
in
in
the
Egypt
known
also.
world.
Yeah,
wow.
and he wrote in Arabic also. Most of the things he wrote in Arabic, which were later translated into Hebrew, which is interesting also. I mean, the man was beyond genius, obviously. And people of this nature had to have a photographic mind. They had to, because they didn't have all the things we have today. Because if you were to read, let's say, Mishnah Torah, at the bottom of the pages, not only would he quote a certain part of the Torah, but he would give all the references to every single place in the Talmud where the same discussion is going on, or the cross references.
Was he married?
Yes, oh yeah. And he had actually his son, one of his sons, Abraham, became a Sufi, a master,
Mhm.
which was very interesting. Yeah, which is a mystical branch of Islam. It was interesting. Yeah.
Talmud is not limited to Hebrew alone today. There's text of Talmud that we can read in English
Well,
with reference.
Well, this side is English.
Oh, that's English in that one? All right.
Okay. So anyway, take for instance the Mishnah Torah, the first book, Sefer Mada, which is a book of knowledge. The foundation. This is from there. The foundation of all foundations and pillar of wisdom is to know that there is a primary being who brought into being all existence. All the beings of the heavens, the earth, and what is between them came into existence only from the truth of his being. In other words, his first book of Mishnah Torah establishes that there is a God. So he's following what? The Torah. In the beginning, God created. Okay. Now, another one of the Mishnah Torah books, Sefer Ahava, the book of love. Notice it's not talking about the love between a man and a woman, it's talking about the love between whom? Us and God. And notice, we are obligated to recite the Shema twice daily, in the evening and in the morning. And of course, when he quotes that, but then he's also going to say, for example, when people are accustomed to sleep, this being the night, and people are accustomed to rise, this being the daytime. So notice, he left out all the discussion of the Talmud. Oh, the stars come out, or the Kohanim eat this, or whatever they give the examples. He simply says, this is what you do when. Okay, next page. He was the 12th century. We're now in the 16th century, 1563, Joseph Cairo, the Shulchan Aruch. This, by the way, is the main code of Jewish law that is followed by Orthodox Jews to this very, very day. If you were to go to yeshiva in Brooklyn, this is what they're studying. They study Talmud, but they study the Shulchan Aruch, the Mishnah, the Talmud, and the Shulchan Aruch. Now, what did Joseph Cairo do 300 years after Maimonides? That Joseph Cairo was born in Spain, but he ended up his life in northern Israel in a town called Sfat. He's buried there, actually. And what Joseph Cairo did was, he also wrote a code of Jewish law, but he left out all of the laws pertaining to the temple in Jerusalem because they were irrelevant. You're now talking about 1600 years after the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. It doesn't matter anymore. Jews were what? If a code has to be written about what to do, what does that mean? Jews were what? Not doing. Because they were all confused. What do I do when? What do I do now? Now, for those of you who are not familiar yet with the Jewish communities, there are basically two Jewish communities in the world. There are the Sephardic Jews, which are the Jews from the Middle East, the Mediterranean area, all the way Italy, going around Portugal, Italy, Spain, swinging around through Israel, and then North Africa. That's the Sephardic world. Northern Israel, Northern Europe is the Ashkenazic world. Okay. So the Shulchan Aruch was written in Israel. So therefore, the laws governed Sephardic Jews. Whereas there was a rabbi, Moses Isserlis, okay, and he wrote a commentary to the Shulchan Aruch called Mappa, M-A-P-P-A, which governed the rules and laws of Jews living in Europe. Because it led to confusion. Shulchan Aruch was so well known, but the Jews living in Europe said, but we don't follow it the exact same way. I'll give you two, and by the way, the two words Shulchan Aruch means a prepared table. The word mappa means tablecloth. So they were playing games with each other because the mappa, Isserlis's book transcends, goes on top of Cairo's book, meaning I'm the better book, basically. It's kind of thing. I'll give you two examples. The Torah, as some of you know, in Torah times, going back 4,000 years ago, polygamy was allowed. Okay, all of them, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Solomon had thousands of wives. I don't even know how he did anything except have wives. Okay, how he was king. It's tough being a king, let me tell you. Okay, what that book said that, right? It's not tough
Good to be
no,
king.
it's great being the king.
Good to be king.
Good to be a king, yeah. Well, it's tough being the king, I'm sure. Anyway, polygamy was allowed in Judaism. So therefore, in the Shulchan Aruch, polygamy is allowed because he's living in a Sephardic world. And guess what? The Muslim men have harems, many wives. So Jews have many wives. Everyone's happy. You got a lot of wives. I got a lot of wives. Everyone's happy. All the women are happy. Hopefully, you're happy. They're happy. Whatever. However, in Europe, you got a big problem because you have what? The Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church is definitely against polygamy. They sure are. You're committing a sin if you're not monogamous. And so, therefore, guess what? In the Mappa section dealing with marriage, it says specifically only one wife. And this is based upon actually a decree by a Rabbi Gershom, I think it was, in the 12th century, who said that Jews living in Europe can no longer have more than one wife. This was what's called a takana, or rabbinic, sort of like an executive decision by the President of the United States, executive order. That's what he did. So another example. Sephardic Jews can eat what? Rice on Passover, whereas Jews of Ashkenazic background forbidden. So there are differences in customs, beliefs, and all that kind of stuff. And so you have these. But the key here is notice what is happening in Judaism, going back to the most ancient books that I've described today. A religion that doesn't evolve is going to find itself in a museum shop sometime, in a gift shop. Right, in the gift shop. Yeah. Let's buy a Jewish doll. Oh, that looks cute. The 5th century BCE or something. Okay. The fact is, it's going to die. So Judaism is evolving constantly, and I've said this before, I'll say this a lot. We are a linear religion, and linear culture moving forward in time to the time of the Messiah, which I'll be talking about at some point in time. We're not circular, we are linear going forward in time. Okay. Larry, you have a question, or you just kind of stretching? Oh, put your hand down, Larry. Okay. Okay. Next page.
Sorry, stretching.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Okay. Kabbalah. I'm going to be going into this later on, but again, in terms of literature, the Zohar. This is actually a quotation of the Zohar in its opening section. By the way, you see those red books behind that lovely photograph of me with those lovely kids? Okay, that was after a 109-mile bike ride. Yeah, they were through when I was the last one in. They had to wait for me to come in. This is a 109-mile fundraiser for diabetes, a tour de cure. And it was from Miami to the very northern tip of the Keys and back. And it took me 8 hours. And there was a 30-mile-an-hour wind that day. And I was having a really rough time. And I was the last rider in, but they couldn't go home until I came in. And I actually had a police motorcycle escort to make sure I remained safe all by myself going through this thing. And they were happy. Anyway, that's the Zohar. Okay, so what is it, 23 volumes? Okay, Jews write a lot. Holy mackerel. Okay, anyway, I'm not going to go into this now, but to give you an idea, the Zohar was written approximately in 1350 of the Common Era, 1350. In, guess what? Spain. And it is the Kabbalistic or mystical commentary to what? The Torah. We're constantly going back to the Torah. Guess what? If I'm not in any way commenting on.
Talk about the Torah.
Oh, yes, the Torah's a move. Yes, I love you, Torah. Okay, we have to put the Torah back in it.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm not commenting on a person's body, okay? But if one were to cut off a person's feet, the person's going to do what? Fall down. Okay. The Torah is our feet, is our foundation. Without it, we are nothing. And there have been movements in Judaism, including Reform Judaism as the beginning, who tried to cut the feet off. And so we don't need those feet anymore. We don't need those foundation anymore. And guess what? They had to change. They had to deal with that. I'm not going to go into, obviously, time is up today, any more or less, but I just wanted to have, you can look at this. This is the opening, but notice again, this is from the introduction to the Zohar. Where does it start from? In the beginning. With the beginning of the manifestation of the king's will, that is, when the king decided to emanate and create the world, a hard spark made an engraving upon the supernal light. This is very complicated. Have fun trying to understand this. Okay. But the point is this: what does the Zohar do? What does Kabbalah do? Which is why I love it so much, in an extraordinary way. It literally describes the way God interacts with existence, and existence interacts with God. It is one of the most incredible books, actually, which describes in detail how God works. And it's quite something. Now, the last page is Musar literature. Notice this brings us up to the 8th century, Moshe Chaim Lutzato Mesilat Yesharim. The word Musar means behavior. And so now there is a whole, now moving in time. Again, what are we always concerned about? Going back all the way to the Bible, how we live and how we think, how we see and what we do. Those are the two operative principles in Judaism. how we think and how we see, how we think and how we do. That is why when Moses came down with those tablets and he held them up and he said, "Are you prepared to follow these laws?" They said two words, Naaseh v'nishma. We will do what we have heard, mind and action. Okay? Mind and action. Mind and body, and thereby soul. So the Mussar literature developed during, particularly during the, well, actually going back to the 16th century, but throughout this whole period of time, 16, 17, 18, even to today. There's actually a Mussar Institute from California. It's about how to behave. How does God want us to live a spiritually based life and an ethical and moral life intertwined together? And when we do so, well, guess what? Putting it back to the beginning, we're living the life that God wants us to live, right, Doreen? Very good. Okay. And then finally, just to say, going back to Ida's question, is that all of these books are a basis of Judaism today. So there are cultures which are older. The Chinese culture is older than our culture today. And I'm quite sure that there are some Chinese who study ancient texts and whatnot. But they are not, at least to my knowledge, they are not a document that still lives today. These texts are all alive today for us. And we can study them, we can ignore them, whatever. But for instance, if you were to go into yeshiva, an Orthodox yeshiva or other schools of learning, they're studying these books today, not as ancient texts, but asking the question, how do we bring the past into our present? Because that's how, therefore, there will be a future. So this is only a little bit of the literature of our people, but it's basically took you notice through time, right? From the most ancient sources through today, as well as beyond. So hopefully you've obtained those books that you were assigned to give. Oh, here it is, okay. So our next class, believe it or not, is December 3rd. Wow. Okay. Next week, yeah.
Yep.
Jewish holy days. So in the book that deals with navigating the Jewish holiday season, not the life cycle book, but the other one. If you can, read the chapters on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Shabbat. And that's what I'm going to talk about next week. Shabbat, Rosh Hashanah, and Yom Kippur.
Any of this being taped?
It is being recorded. We had a lot of problems today. I hope the recording
Be
is,
able to be here, unfortunately.
hopefully next
All
week.
right, we
will be
will
better.
make every effort to strengthen the Wi-Fi, that,
So.
because I will not
Right.
climb again.
Right.
You said, though, that people taking the class, if they miss a class, you'll
Right.
give us a site where we could.
Well, we're recording
Fine.
it.
Yeah,
Oh,
but not,
okay,
I don't
good.
want to access the recording, because they're
It's
not.
gonna be on YouTube.
It's,
Oh, it will be on YouTube.
you,
I believe it already is. The
Eric,
first two are,
No,
Put the
because
first
two.
but there were
originally-
interruptions. I just want to make that clear. It hasn't been
Yeah.
perfect.
Well, the
Maybe-
video is
It will be
fine
perfect.
today. It's
What?
just the sound kept cutting in and out.
Yeah, so it was okay when we left the phone and went on the computer? You didn't have a big interruption there?
When?
No, we
Okay,
did
good.
have a big,
There
We
was
did have
one
big-
with no sound for a while, yeah.
right.
okay, Sue, we
Yes.
lost Wi-Fi in this part of the building.
But my phone was
Yeah,
recording
Yeah,
it.
but we did lose Wi-Fi and that
They
They
interrupted.
were having the sound from my phone. They
Yeah.
were,
Let's get them.
even when the
No,
Wi-Fi.
Oh, the sound is much better now.
No, there was no sound.
With
There
this
was no
Wi-Fi. It sounds much better.
Thank
Also,
you very much.
Lynn, this
Thank you.
looks
I
like,
brought two
take
bowls
it all
of
in.
fruit and I put them in the refrigerator in the fridge.
Right.
So I will bring them out, I think, after the fact, because I don't want to take them out.
Okay, and I understand the other food is still in the outside fridge, or was it
Yeah, it
brought
should
in?
be. I don't know. I
Okay,
don't know.
all right,
Oh.
hopefully
Yeah.
Mark will come back
Yes.
and get it in.
Okay, well,
Bye,
I'm saying
everyone.
goodbye.
I truly have.
All right,
to
let
go
me
home.
check
Bye-bye.
the list in the office. Okay, hold on. I'm gonna, we're gonna say goodbye because Hello, goodbye.
Okay,
Thank you for being
bye.
patient with us today. We'll try to make it better next
you.
week.
No
Thank you.
problem.
Here-
Thank
Thanks.
you. Bye, Sue.